if I could have one of you people help us confirm if you can hear me just fine, and if you can see my screen, please. Okay. All right. So I thought I would probably give a bit of context here, because I've had a number of people kind of reach out and send emails trying to clarify the issue of classroom attendance. What I've done is I've went out of my way here to excuse me. I've provided you with a document, a spreadsheet rather, which has it has 4 columns, right? It has a column called class, virtual class login details, student ID, and last name, and then first names. And what we've done is we've explicitly told you to say, what you do is just go through this document. Thank you very much for those of you that have gone through this. We've asked you to go through these documents, very simple instructions, especially for 4th years. I do this with my 1st year students, 2nd year students, and they have zero trouble trying to understand this very basic thing here. And what I've told you is that what you want to do is you want to go through this document and just indicate your student ID against an entry of a name that you use to attend classes. So for instance, if you look at my current screen right now, I've got about 30 people logged on, right? There's this person called Benaya Lushomo. I can't see the name here, but there's Brighton Muvanga, Chisanga, Ilukena. Now, I don't know who these people are, right? In fact, in some instances, it turns out that some people who log on using very obscure names, right? So it would be difficult for us to know who they are. Like, for instance, I want to draw attention to this entry here, right? I have no idea who CMLK is, right? Or who Dennis is. Dennis could be anybody here, right? So what I've told you to do is you just indicate your name against this. And what I do with this information is, for all of these, I've actually activated also attendance from all the classes that we've had so far, at least the virtual sessions. I still have to transcribe the physical sessions. Like, for instance, if you look at July 29th, using this information, what I am doing, right? And hopefully, this is the last time that we have people trying to seek clarification here, and it's for those that decide not to attend class. Using this information, I will go to the attendance register, right, which has these details. Like, there's Adele Allen, Avio Platinum or something. I don't know who this is. Yeah. And then there's Adele Mumba or something. And what I do is I'm ascribing scores based on your attendance, right? And attendance doesn't mean, it's not a binary. It's not something that is binary here, right? You're not going to get marks for attending for 14 seconds, for instance. If you look at Isaac Chisalia, for instance, nothing, right? I don't know why I'm giving him 25 marks here, but it turns out that there's a threshold. So based on how long the class was and how much time you attended class, you're given a score. So if you think you're going to show up in the last 4 minutes here and get credit for attending classes, you're mistaken here. There are marks allocated to attendance, right? In fact, I value these more than give you an assignment that you're probably going to submit by making use of these large language models or something like that, right? So I don't know if there are any questions in regards to this. Quite sad, really, that people still don't want to do something as basic as this. This is something that you can do in like less than 10 seconds. You just click on the link that I've shared with you. You scroll down to your name or entries that correspond to your name, and then you type in your computer number. It's simple. It doesn't get any easier than that, right? So I don't know if there are any questions or thoughts about this. I've had people that have reached out to me to claim that, hey, listen, Lighton, I've attended class, but my name doesn't appear. Well, no, that's not true, right? If your name does not appear here, you've not attended class. Either you have not thoroughly gone through the list here to check details of your name or you simply have not been attending class. So I don't know. Are there any questions about this?
Yes, doctor. I have a question.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
You got to attend and yet you attend your class today. You mean this very first class? Our names will be added, or perhaps no one get added to the spreadsheet.
Sorry, come again.
For those who haven't been attending the online classes, whose names are missing on the spreadsheet, and yet you try to attend the very online class, meaning this very one. Will the names be added to the spreadsheet
Yeah,
or not?
so we're gonna add you to this. This thing is a moving target, right? If your question is you haven't been attending and then you just decided to show up because Lighton has said there's marks allocated to attendance, yeah, sure, we're gonna expand this thing here. So after today, this list is obviously going to evolve because I know, right? Because there's a stick that's being used right now. There's probably going to be a lot of people that are going to be attending. This is like 171 people. I counted them. Well, initially when I went to the system, it was about 100 or so, 170 odd people or something, but it's about 150 now or something like that for whatever reason. Um, and then you have a situation where, like right now, right? If you look at people that attend, not that it matters really. If you don't want to attend class, that's fine here. But it's just the policy that I have is there will be marks here, right? If I look at the people attending right now, it's like 46 people, right? I know that some of these people, these 46, are people that have not previously attended classes. So what I'll do is I'll expand on this list. So this will be expanded, and after today's class, if your name has not appeared because you haven't been attending, um, you should be able to find your name, and then you can probably just add the computer number that is associated with a username here. Okay, does that answer your question, Innocent?
Yes, it does, doctor. Thank you very much
All right.
for
Great,
the
great, great, great.
for the
And then
clarification.
sometimes, yeah, of course, you're welcome. And sometimes, right, I look around in the what do you call this? In the WhatsApp group to check and stuff, and at fourth year here, I don't know. It's very puzzling, right? Where somebody is asking about, but it's okay for a large group like this. There'll always be stragglers and people who just they don't really care about what's happening here, right? There are always people like that here. Hey, that's on you here. But um, you have very strange comments, right? And sometimes I'm thinking, I don't know about this, right? Where is show us the schedule or something? Really? Are you kidding me right now? These are things that we discussed like in the first class that we had, right? I told you there's a calendar. Bookmark that calendar. The calendar is a moving target. If that changes, I always communicate changes in advance myself. If that changes, like today, I reach out to the course rep, liaise with the group. I am making this proposal. I'm not going to be around. I'm making this proposal, right? For today, because today and tomorrow, for today actually, for today and tomorrow, because I I am attending a workshop, right? Is what I said. And then people are still asking questions. So I don't know what to do there, right? If you have trouble understanding questions here, I don't know how you found yourself in fourth year doing computer science, which requires logic, but that's okay also. Um, anyways, so here's the thing. Unless if there are any thoughts or questions, I would want us to proceed with life as usual. We're not proceed here with lecture series number 3. It is. Are there, unless if there are any questions, clarifications? It's okay if you're still lost. I guess I don't know. Okay. If there are no questions or thoughts here, we're going to continue our discussion. And a reminder here that we have started looking at these standardized processes, right, for executing data mining projects. So the idea behind this is an entity like Zanaco, Zambia National Commercial Bank, come through to you and you are running this firm, this data mining firm or data analysis or the data analytics firm, and they approach you and make mention of the fact that they're looking for a solution to detect fraud or something, right? Because the process that they currently use is a manual process. The idea behind these standardized processes is um, I don't know what's happening there, but there's a last or child or something. Do you want to? I don't know what's happening here. This is a problem when you tell people their marks allocated to attendance, and you just switch on the phone and it's just in autopilot. I think I want to change this, right? I can play that game as well, I guess, and I would really love to play that game actually. So maybe we can tweak things a little here and have save points, right? Ask questions, and we're going to analyze the chat. I mean, if we're learning data mining, we might as well analyze data about how we're interacting with this course, right? Maybe write about you here, explaining why students at fourth year in the academic year 2025 failed data mining, right? Based on course engagements, right? By analyzing interaction logs and stuff like that. That would be fun. We shall write about you. So the idea is Anako comes to you and they're like, well, we want you to build this solution. The idea behind these standardized processes, methodologies is that they provide you with a predefined series of steps that you follow, or stages, whatever you want to call them, activities. And we said it's much like what we do when we're building software. They told us initially we learned how to program and we realized, well, we can write programs, but we were told that if we're truly interested in writing quality code, what we have got to do is we used software engineering best practices. We use software process models or development models, as they are called, development processes like Scrum, like feature-driven development, Kanban, right? Spiral model, or the waterfall model, if you will. So it turns out that there's a similar thing as it relates to data mining, right? When you're mining data or when you're trying to derive insights from data, what you do is the recommendation is you use standardized models. And we realize something interesting here, that there's a broad spectrum of models, quite a number of them. Our focus is going to be on the CRISP-TM, SEMA, and KDD process. And we start going through the CRISP-DM methodology. We realize that this methodology, at a very high level here, is segmented in what are called phases, right? These phases have associated generic tasks, and each one of those associated generic tasks further has associated subtasks. For each specialized subtask, you have what's called a process instance or something. And true to that, what we started doing is we started going through the 6 phases of the CRISP-DM model or methodology or approach. There's business understanding, there's data understanding, there's data preparation, there's modeling, there's evaluation, and there's deployment. We realize that as part of business understanding, what you are looking at doing is understanding the problem itself. And as for data understanding, you have a sense of what sort of sources you're going to use as a basis to implement this model. And then finally, but as part of data preparation, what you do is you are preparing this data such that its final form is going to be good enough to be used as input to the overall modeling process. And the modeling process is the part that enables you to build these inference models depending on the sort of machine learning task or AI task that you're undertaking. After you build your model, you evaluate, right, against the business goals identified during business understanding, and then finally you deploy. Now, here's the thing. We spent a great deal of time when we met last by understanding what business understanding is all about. We realized that as part of business understanding, we are typically busy with what we introduce as situation analysis. We identify the objectives, right, of undertaking that project itself, right? Building this data mining pipeline, if you will. So you understand the general and specific objectives of the business. You also, it turns out, identify the broad data mining goals. So it turns out there's a difference between your data mining goals and the business objectives, as it were. And finally, we realized that it's important for us to plan. So we discussed all of this, and today we want to start looking at so-called data understanding. Um, as the name suggests here, the idea behind data understanding is quite straightforward. Your interest is to comprehensively understand the data that you are going to be working with as you are implementing this data mining pipeline. Now, so it goes without saying, really, that if your interest is to comprehensively understand the data you're going to be working with, then one of the very first things you're going to have to do is identify where this data is coming from, right? You're working with data. The question is, where is the data coming from? That makes sense. So you have got to identify the data sources. When you identify the data sources, at that point, you do not know the gory details of the data you're going to be working with, right? You don't know the structure. You don't know the data attributes associated with the data itself, the total number of data sources, um, the state of the data itself. In fact, you don't even know how exactly you're going to collect that data, right? Whether it's going to be in real time or something, or whether you're going to have to digitize the data or digitalize it. And so for you to gain a sense of that, what you'd have to do is do some preliminary data collection. So you identify the data sources. Let's say there are five data sources. You do an initial data collection. And the idea behind doing an initial data collection is you will gain a sense of how exactly you're going to subsequently extract the entire data, for instance. You're going to be interacting with a RESTful API, for instance. Are you going to have to extract this data from a relational database management system or a relational database? Is it a NoSQL database? Are you going to gain access to unstructured data, for instance, audio, video, or text? So you do an initial data collection. We'll talk more about this. And then something else that you work towards is you work towards what's called the exploratory data analysis exercise. And the idea behind this is simple, right? Because you've done an initial data collection, for you to fully understand the data itself you're going to be working with, you must explore it. And it turns out that the exploration will primarily make use of visualizations, for instance, because it's through the use of visualization techniques that you will be able to determine outliers, identify outliers in your data set, right? Identify attributes that are going to be meaningful, if you will. To a certain extent, actually, as part of your exploratory data analysis exercise, you'll be able to identify relationships that exist amongst your different data attributes. It turns out that when you're working with data or with data attributes, one of the things you're going to have to do is identify the things you're going to be measuring and the things that are going to influence what you're measuring. So what was introduced to you guys as independent variables and dependent variables or something. And typically, when you start identifying independent variables and dependent variables, you would be interested in the relationships that exist. For instance, we know that as we are working with, I don't know what this is here, but when we're working with our student at risk of failing dataset, right? When we do this, of course, I've already given away this stuff here, but I mean, why not give away this stuff, right? We realize that there's a relationship that exists between things like the final exam score and gender. Ooh, let's not be controversial here, but there's a relationship that exists between accommodation status and exam performance, right? Just by doing some preliminary exploratory data analysis, you actually be able to do that, right? So in other words, as part of exploratory data analysis, what we're saying is some of the things that you do is you begin to understand, I mean, to fully appreciate what sort of relationship exists between these different variables. And really, the other thing to appreciate about the relationships that exist amongst the variables is the fact that you probably realize that there are certain attributes that will really be useless, if you will. I'll give you an example of academic year. when you start analyzing this data, you'll be being noticed, well, the academic year here will probably not really have that much use here in terms of building your inference model, right? Perhaps it will be useful in trying to categorize the results, analyzing the final output here, but certainly not useful when you are implementing the model itself. And so as part of exploratory data analysis, one of the things that you do is you establish these relationships really. Um, and an interesting thing about why it's important to appreciate or determine relationship that exists is you're working your way through or towards a technique that I don't know if we're supposed to discuss this here, but dimensionality reduction, for instance, right? So this notion that sometimes you will find yourself working with this complex data set, right? That perhaps will have a lot of columns. Now, because when you have a lot of columns and hence you're working with a large data set, it will entail that you need to gain access to a lot of compute resources. One of the techniques that you leverage is to reduce the dimension of the data you're working with, right? And part of how you do this is by identifying these relationships and stuff. And then obviously there's got to be some sort of data quality assessment. So this notion that when you do your initial data collection and you do exploratory data analysis, you want to conduct an assessment in order to determine whether or not the data that you are planning to work with is actually good enough to be used as input to the model implementation phase. I'll give you an example here. If let's say I wanted to build some inference model based on data I'm collecting from you, right? Let's say attendance, and let's say only 10% of students are attending, the quality of data in that particular instance would be poor, right? And perhaps it won't really be, it won't make a lot of sense for me to to continue off with the model implementation process here because the data quality is just subpar. It's very poor. Okay, so a few details here about these different key things that you do as part of data understanding. We'll start with identification of data sources. As the name suggests, you're going out there probably by interacting with your clients and you're finding out potential sources of data. It's like the student at risk of failing, right? As part of this business understanding, I will discover here that, well, literature suggests that performance of students at undergraduate is influenced by things like engagement with a course. Okay? It's like engagement, course engagement. We know this. Engagement. What else? Well, the course workload. Well, demographic factors. Student demographic factors. So your task, right? You go out there and as part of business understanding, you discover that these are some of the factors that affect or that will influence or that will impact student performance. The question to ask yourself is, well, how am I going to measure course engagement? How do I truly measure if a student is engaging with the course? Well, I'll tell you one thing. A domain expert, you come to Lighton, you ask Lighton, and Lighton will tell you, well, the way that would normally determine if a student is engaging with a course here is we look at attendance, right? Okay. Or we'll look at things like access to learning management system or something. And in your wisdom, what you then do is you probe a little further and you try and find out. So is attendance, you're going to Lighton and you're asking him, if Lighton is one of those people you're listing requirements from, is attendance in 4792 consistently taken? Maybe Lighton will tell you, yes, we have classes are conducted in two main ways, right? They are in-person classes, and we also have there are in-person classes that we have. We also have virtual classes. And Lighton will tell you, well, for in-person classes, I have this register, physical register that I use and I transcribe. So I have the data there. For virtual classes, what I do is I use a Chrome plugin or something, right? That will automatically keep track of um, student attendance or something. What you would have done in this particular case is you've identified the source of data associated with this attribute, attendance, course engagement. You again interact with the domain expert like Lighton, and Lighton will tell you that, well, in terms of access to learning management system, it turns out that the learning management system that is used is Moodle, and Moodle actually keeps track of logs outlining details. No, there's um, a bit of thing here. I'll ask us to mute our things here, static. Moodle actually keeps track of logs. Logs in terms of who is doing what here. And maybe Lighton will even go a step further and showcase to you to say, well, in terms by way of giving you a sample here, what typically happens when a student is accessing Moodle is um, the logs the logs that are generated by the Moodle are such that they will provide details in regards to. By the way, I mean, I wish I could here, but I don't think I can give marks here for accessing the Moodle. That would be fun here. But I tell you that the logs will be so fine grained such that they'll have details of the name of the person. Okay. What sort of action they're performing, right? If you look at the event tag here, what sort of action they're performing, the context, right? The component that they're accessing, the event name, even the IP address that they're using to access that particular resource, right? And I was like, oh, okay. So using this information, what we can do is we can easily use the Moodle logs as a way of measuring engagement, right? So the logs here. And in terms of course workload, you discover that, well, there's a student information system, and the student information system keeps track of the courses that each and every student at the University of Zambia is enrolled into for each academic year. So if that's the case, then what we can do is we can use that information to compute the course workload. And the idea behind this really is typically the course workload or the credit scores are supposed to be more or less the same here, right? The credit scores are supposed to be more or less consistent, in other words, right? But there are certain instances where students will have like course overloads and all those things. I don't know how students get to a stage where they're doing these sort of things here. But so we discover that we can use SIS to do this. And then for the demographic factors as well, we discover that we can actually use SIS to pull out your demographic factors, your date of birth. And SIS has all the information about you, your next of kin. Not that would want to use the next of kin, I mean, to build inference models here, but demographic details of your gender, your date of birth, for instance. So that if you're interested in using an attribute such as age here to try and see if you can build an inference model tied to that, you can easily use that field, right? But the point here is that what you're doing as part of data understanding is you are identifying data sources. And this is not easy, right? Especially in instances where you don't understand the space. You typically be at the mercy of a domain expert. If somebody approached me and told me, like an insurance company, and they tell me, we're interested in building this insurance predictive model or something to determine which of our clients, our motor vehicle insurance clients, are more likely to drop off, right? Churn rate in the next 5 years or in the next 2 years, so that we entice them to stick around. That's the idea behind churn, right? What I'll tell them is that, oh, listen, I don't understand how insurance works. In fact, maybe I won't tell them that, but what I'll do is, if I'm contracted to do that, is I'll subcontract the services of an expert, a person that understands how insurance works. And then through my interactions with that person, they'll be able to steer me in the right direction insofar as identification of data sources is concerned. Some problems are trivial, right? If let's say we wanted to conduct sentiment analysis, people's uh, views in terms of which political party is more likely to win the general elections next year or something like that, some weird thing like that. I'd say, well, you know what I'm going to do, even if this is not going to be very representative, but I'm just going to harvest data from social media platforms because Zambians like playing around on Facebook like that. I'm going to go on Facebook and I will start harvesting content there. I already know my data source, right? I don't need an expert there. All I would need to do is go and study Facebook's Graph API to figure out which specific endpoints I'm going to use to pull out that information. So you're identifying the data sources. In addition, though, as part of the identification of the data sources, what you're doing implicitly is you're trying to assess whether the data is going to be available, right? It's one thing for you to identify the data sources. The question is, I mean, is the data accessible? Right. So this notion of accessibility here could entail, maybe it's not going to be trivial for you to gain access to information because it's not publicly available information, it's private data, right? So you're assessing the availability of the data here, right, from the various sources. And really what you begin to notice here is that at some point, depending on the problem, you find yourself trying to differentiate or distinguish data that you have control over, mostly like internal data that have to be owned by the company for whom you're implementing this inference model, if you will, and external data, so stuff that you have less control over. In some instances, this external data could be easily accessible because it's publicly available, like Lusaka Times data is an API, like data about CDF, is it? If somebody wanted to, please, one of you can do this. Although, when you're working with the government here, good luck making money there. It's sad like that. Yeah, it's quite sad here. Unless there's an external company somewhere out there, some external entity that provides funding, I guess you'd be lucky like that. But what I'm trying to say here is, imagine you wanted to do an analysis on constituency development fund, right? Because everybody's thinking about CDF. You'd say, well, what we've realized here is that the Republic of Zambia has done a pretty decent job here in terms of going electronic, right? What we've discovered is that all councils, all councils have a website. Thank you, Smart Zambia Institute. Come on, not now. All councils have website. Listen, it's my hometown, Chipata here. I don't know why it was the first one here. Chipata City Council, Pangali Council. And by the way, what you discover here is a pattern, is it? Gwembe Council. I don't know if you bothered here. So you go to the Ministry of Local Government and stuff and figure out how many councils do we have. 116 plus, maybe close to 120. I don't know how many here, somewhere around 116 or something. And what you start doing is you start combing for information from all of these different councils, right? Coming from it, and in this particular case, maybe you discover that Smart Zambia Institute, it's done by Smart Zambia Institute. Do your due diligence and discover Smart Zambia Institute uses some consistent structure here. Maybe we can scrape for information, right? So we are going to all of these websites. This is the format, by the way. We are going to all of these websites like this. Chipata Council. I don't know how they do this, but sometimes it would have been better if they did it a different way. Chipangali Council, right? There's a pattern here. There's a method to the madness, thankfully. So you discover that there's a structure, right? And so you discover that in almost all of these instances, observe top menu item here, CDF. There's probably a menu item that speaks to CDF. And the data may not really be, I don't know what is this here. Very sad. They hire people like you, maybe not like you or something, to update these things. But you find that people that are hired as IT experts here just lazing around. Okay, not lazing around though. But you discover that there's information on and about CDS reports and stuff. So you can you can extract this information like this. And so the question is, right? The point I'm trying to put across here is that this information that you're extracting in this particular case is publicly available information. It's out there in the public. In other instances, this information may be private, may be difficult to gain access to this data. Maybe you may need to uh, get permission, get ethical clearance approval. Fun fact, when we started working on the student at risk of failing project, we just didn't go to SIS and extract the data, right? We needed to go and get permission. We formally wrote to CICT to get permission to the data here. In some instances, the result may be negative, right? So you better brace yourself here. So what you do, in other words, here is you have got to define all data access permissions and security considerations. If we are going to get data from Moodle or SIS, what sort of permission do we need to go and get? If, let's say, you are building a solution that requires that you gain access to CDR records from telecommunications companies in Zambia, you have got to go to these telcos and find out, right, whether they'll be able to give you permission. Usually they won't, actually. In my previous life, I worked, I used to be given good money personally. It was good when I just graduated anyway. And my entire job was just to extract data, detailed records, right, from databases. So you're extracting details of what websites are people visiting the most. And back then, bidding was time-based. It wasn't based on volume. So we'll be extracting data from the Jatayu charging proxy, for instance. It was fun at the time, but that's okay also. So you're identifying data sources like that, right? But we see here that in terms of the initial data collection, and by the way, some of these things, right, are contextual. The things that you do would be contextual. It depends on the problem. In some instances, you won't really have to worry about getting access to company-owned data, right? The publicly available data may be sufficient. In other instances, you may have to present a very compelling case for why it would be beneficial for an organization to digitalize or to digitize data, like our enterprise imaging in Zambia project. I mean, it's difficult for us. It was difficult for us to do anything before we could actually digitalize the data, right? These medical records that are generated by the university teaching hospitals, adult hospital. Recently, what do you call this? I discovered that NAPSA was advertising for a slew of positions for data entry clerks, and I realized that what NAPSA is doing is they're digitizing their data, and usually when entities start digitizing their data, it's generally the case that they have a plan to start taking advantage of these AI techniques, right, or machine learning techniques to try and derive insights from data. I was surprised the other time. I was actually shocked and impressed by NAPSA. I requested for a NAPSA partial withdrawal here, and because I started working right after I graduated, literally when I graduated, I got a job. I was a costings clerk, believe it or not. And they have my records from as far back as 2002, right? When I started working for that company here, they have those records, which was amazing. I thought it was interesting in NAPSA at work, but also they make a lot of money. And then you have your initial data collection, right? So we see here that what you're doing is fundamental. What you're doing is you're coming up with your data requirements planning, right? You're trying to define your selection criteria. So you know where you're going to collect the data, but what data exactly are you going to extract? Which specific attribute are you going to focus on? And obviously, some of the other things that you are going to have to think about here is how are you going to be extracting the data itself? Are you going to have to build some scripts, right? In some instances, these scripts will be trivial because you're extracting data using a machine readable interface, like an API endpoint. However, in some instances, well, no API. Wait, I know these people use WordPress here. FP admin. By the way, these days when you're looking at it's WordPress, When you want to figure out what sort of technology is used by a website, you can use tools like beltwith.com. Is it? You just go there and feed it with a URL, and it will tell you, oh, this website is implemented using WordPress. And if it's implemented use WordPress, maybe you may not know. You research WordPress and you realize by default WordPress exposes information using a RESTful endpoint, right? If it exposes information using a RESTful endpoint API, then you can potentially extract this information programmatically. But maybe it could be the case that you're extracting information from static pages, so you scrape, right? You figure out how you can take advantage of Python packages that will enable you to scrape data, right? Selenium or something like that. I don't know. Just look up Python scraping uh, libraries or something. And these days you can just use an LLM to do these things. And what you notice is that there's a whole slew of things. Selenium, I've used Beautiful Soup is a big one. The average person who's scraping information will probably tell you, I use the Beautiful Soup to extract the data or something. Scrappy, Anyway, the whole nine yard. But listen, I thought if I can come back here, when you're defining data permissions, right? In some instances, you know that in as much as it may not be legal for you to gain access to data by scraping, what some people will do is they'll do bad things like continue and extract data. That is unethical, right? And you want to be very careful what you're doing here, lest you be used as an example, right? If a platform like if a platform like Facebook tells you to say, for you to gain access to data, you would have to first of all gain permission, and you realize that, well, we can actually scrape information from Facebook by just automating this process of, because you see, when you log into Facebook, right? If you're doing this programmatically and you're not logged on here, it's difficult to access information that is not publicly available, like if it's not a public page. However, if you can simulate logging in, which is how most of these tools that scrape data off of Facebook work, what you can do is you can simulate a user logging in, typically using your credentials. Although sometimes you get banned and stuff, but you can simulate that whole process by logging in, and you'll be able to harvest information. But guess what? That is unethical conduct. Ethics is about doing the right thing when nobody's watching. We are, because we are ethical like that, we're not going to go into the CSC 4792 exam with materials hidden in our boxers or something, right? That's unethical, and you probably be used as an example if you do that, but I know a lot of people don't learn like that, right? You find, and I know you're probably going to go out there and you'll be busy looking at Facebook scraper, right? Facebook scraper, and in fact you in Python, and then you do a focus search on GitHub, right? .com, and then you discover this whole world, right? Oh, there's this really wonderful package here by Kevin ZG or something, and this package has 2,700 stars or something, and 666 forks, and so this is a go-to thing. I'm just going to clone this repository and follow the instructions, and I will go and extract Hakainde Hichilema's Facebook page like that. That is unethical conduct. Well, though, but if we're doing an experiment, we can do that, is it? If we're learning, right? Just like in your, I don't know if you have some cybersecurity course where they're teaching you how to hack, right? Not that you're going to be hacking, but you're learning how to hack like that. But it's important, especially if you're one of those people who's going to be thinking more about building solutions for people to use. You want to make sure that you're doing things ethically. Here is a point I'm trying to put across. But anyways, so initial data collection, right? You're doing that. What we see here is fundamentally what you're doing is you're collecting this raw data, right? Using APIs and databases, the actual collection process. You are studying the formats, the various formats that you're working with. In certain instances, you assess the amount of data, right? And the types of attributes. And these categorical attributes, are we working with numeric attributes or continuous attributes? Is it textual content or something like that? Is it a mixture of these attributes? And you soon understand during data transformation that all of this information is important, because the techniques that you use to transform the data primarily are linked to the data attribute type. Like, for instance, when you want to transform categorical data, you probably use one-hot encoding, for instance. When you're dealing with numeric data, you may want to scale the data, for instance, and things of that sort. But you also do things like data sampling, right? Typically, you want to work on just a subset of the data that you potentially be working with. Now, when we meet next, when I was, if you look at the version of the slides that you have available on the Moodle, you notice that I was planning that we'll just briefly talk about exploratory data analysis, but I've since expanded on the slides and I'll update them on the Moodle for us to spend a little bit of time learning about how exactly we conduct an exploratory data analysis exercise. It's not just enough for us to say we just draw graphs and tables, right? We want to understand what EDA is all about. I'm going to pause here. So when we meet next, which is Saturday, by the way, because tomorrow, unfortunately, is the last day of the workshop I'm attending. So I'm not available at 12, sadly. And so I'm proposing that on Friday, I normally have a class at 18. So I'm proposing that we have a class on Saturday or something. I want to leave you at this. Please, you're in fourth year. I'm going to repeat this. And in my defense, I'm going to say I told you so. You want to attend classes. Yeah, I'm going to use this to allocate marks to this. Till we meet, I guess, on Saturday. Goodbye.